What's happening, everybody? Welcome into the Pack-A-Day podcast here on Packer Report, as well as on YouTube. I'm your host, Andy Herman, writer and editor for Packer Report, as well as owner of the Pack-A-Day podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Today, my main topic is going to be a little bit about Packers draft philosophy. So let's start off by going over what we kind of think of the Green Bay Packers as when we kind of think overall philosophical values and things like that. I think overall we kind of get this idea that Green Bay's very conservative. They have this draft and develop philosophy. They're not usually going to overextend themselves too much with trades or free agent acquisitions. They'll sign players from time to time, and we've certainly seen it a little bit more under Brian Gutekunst, but they generally prioritize keeping their own and developing those players in-house and then keeping them once they have. Again, no major aggressive moves. You're not seeing them sign the Antonio Browns or the J.J. Watts or, any of these usual, kind of big name free agents that maybe later in their career have had some off the field issue. They're generally this kind of conservative team. However, there's one way in which they are actually very aggressive. And I'm going to be going over that today. And I want to take a look at the last 16 drafts for the Green Bay Packers, and more specifically, what Green Bay's done with their first pick in each of those 16 drafts. So in order to do so, we kind of need to get an idea of what a premium position player is. So the general rule of thought, or the general thought process around premium players, is quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher, corner. And then usually next up on that list would be defensive lineman, especially if you can be more of a penetrating defensive lineman or somebody who's going to shut down that middle of the field and make things easier for your linebackers. Maybe you don't need as good a linebackers then, or they're basically going to almost level up your linebackers because those defensive linemen are just eating space, acting as a black hole, allowing those linebackers to roam free, run sideline to sideline, and it basically makes them better. So those are kind of your premium position players. And if you look at how Green Bay has attacked their first pick in the last 16 drafts, and there's a difference here, not first round picks, because sometimes they've had more than one first round pick. Other times they haven't had a first round pick. But if you look at their first pick in the draft over the last 16 years, 13 of the 16 times it has been a premium position player. And that's going back to when Ted Thompson started and selected Aaron Rodgers with his first pick. So going back that far, you can start to see this trend of really wanting to focus and hone in on premium position players. Technically, it goes back even a year prior to that when Mike Sherman selected Ahmad Carroll. I'm not going to give Mike Sherman any of the benefit of the doubt here to say that he was still targeting premium position players. He just badly needed a corner and reached for Ahmad Carroll. That's another story for another day. But if you want to be technical about it, it's actually 14 of the last 17. But for real purposes, we're going to say 13 out of 16 since Ted Thompson came to town. So let's look at some of those picks. Aaron Rodgers, Justin Harrell, BJ Raji, Brian Bulaga, Derek Sherrod, Nick Perry, Dayton Jones, Demarius Randall, Kenny Clark, Kevin King, Jair Alexander, Rashawn Gary, and Jordan Love. Those were the 13 that were all either quarterback, offensive tackle, edge rusher, defensive lineman, or cornerback. All right, one of those five positions, 13 of the last 16 first picks in the draft. The three outliers, AJ Hawk, of course. The next one was Jordy Nelson. And interestingly enough they didn't have a first round pick that year. They had 3 second round picks. They had Jordy Nelson, who was a kind of non-premium position player, but then they went Brian Brom, Pat Lee, premium position. So they kind of made up for it after that Jordy Nelson pick. And then the other one was Clinton Dix, of course, safety. And that was, again, one of their outliers. But more often than not, they have been very honed in on and focused on taking premium position players with that pick. And then they've kind of gone about their day after that, especially in the second round. They're willing to go more best player available, or they're willing to go maybe, some more fun positions, running back, wide receiver, things like that. Players like A.J. Dillon, Elton Jenkins at guard, again, generally a non-premium position. Devontae Adams, Eddie Lacy, Randall Cobb, Brandon Jackson, Darren College, Nick Collins, all of those outside of that usual premium position player. So it kind of seems like they have a very distinct idea of what they want to attack in the first round, getting somebody at a premium position. And then after that, they're just going to settle in and let the board kind of fall to them as it may and just pick the best player that's on their board, kind of regardless of positional value. And I think there's a really smart reason for that. And I think if you look even closer at it, and if you kind of go back to that Demarius Randall draft and really since then, it seems like not only are they focusing on premium position players, but they are focusing on elite athletes or very high-end potential players. So Demarius Randall, 8.4 RAS score, RAS score, relative athletic score. So that's basically the percentile that they're in relative to other players at their position athletically. So Demarius Randall was in the 84th percentile as a defensive back in that draft. Kenny Clark in the 75th percentile. Kevin King, 99.4 percentile. Jair Alexander, the 95th percentile. Rashawn Gary, the 99th percentile. And then, of course, Jordan Love. I didn't even look up his RAS score because for quarterbacks it doesn't matter. But, of course, high-end prospect that if he hits, it hits big at the most important position. So going back all the way to Aaron Rodgers, premium positions. Going back to Demarius Randall specifically, now you're looking at premium positions with high-end athleticism and high-end traits. And I'm going to flip this a bit, and I'm going to talk about another Wisconsin sports team, so humor me for just a second. I'm going to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks for just a second, because if you remember, there was that stretch there where they were the consummate 8 seed. They were the Jeff Fisher 7-9 BS sort of style team. They were in complete no man's land. They were consistently fighting for the 8th or 7th seed in the playoffs for the right to get annihilated by whoever the number 1 or number 2 seed was. And then they were out of the lottery or at the back end of the lottery. In the NBA, it's usually just your top, 5, 6 picks, or certainly those top end lottery picks that are going to be your best picks. And then you're left with basically the scrap heap after that. Maybe you get some 3-and-D type players who can play defense, shoot threes. You get some role players, but it's very, very difficult to get any sort of high-end player at that point in the draft. So what the Milwaukee Bucks basically decided to do, because they were consistently picking pick 12, pick 13, somewhere in that range, is they decided that they were going to basically pick the highest upside player possible. And it didn't matter if it was a high bust potential. Their goal was once every 5 years to hit on one of these hopefully high-end players and just get it right. And they went with Yijian Lian, which did not turn out. Joe Alexander, which was one of the most athletic players in that entire class. It may not seem that way, but he was. He was an absolute freak athlete. Didn't work out. Brandon Jennings had some ups and downs, but there's no doubt that he was a high-end prospect that if he hit was going to be good. We saw it very early in his career. Larry Sanders, again, athletic freak, defensive player, never really worked out. They go to Tobias Harris, who didn't really work out with the Bucks, but has become really basically an all-star caliber player for the most part. And then finally, eventually, hitting on Giannis Antetokounmpo. And sometimes it takes a couple Yijian Lians and a couple Joe Alexanders to stumble upon that super high-end player in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and everything else before that and everything else after that basically is paid for itself because you found Giannis. And it sucked when you drafted Joe Alexander, and it sucked when you drafted Yijian Lian. But when you're consistently picking in that no man's land spot and you were a consistent 8th seed or just outside of the 8th seed, you really had no other option. You were going to be stuck in no man's land forever if you just kept picking the best available player on the board who was, maybe a B-, C+, 3-and-D player who could play a role but was never going to get you over the top. It did you no good. And ultimately, especially in the NBA, you need at least 3 super high-end players, at least, all-star caliber players. And normally one of them needs to be a superstar if you want to compete. If you don't get a mega star, if you're the Bucks, you're completely sunk. So they went with we're going to draft the highest end possible player that we possibly can get, and we're going to hope that something hits along the way, or we can get a couple of them that hit in maybe, a 5-season stretch and pair those guys together for the long term. It was supposed to be Jabari Parker after that. Unfortunately, that did not work out, but it is what it is. They still have Giannis, and maybe they can actually win a championship this year. I'm not holding my breath, but it should be a fun team to watch come the playoffs. Fast forward to the Green Bay Packers, and in a very similar way, what they're doing with their first-round pick, because they're consistently picking, usually, we had a couple, Jair Alexander and Rashawn Gary picks in the top 20 there, but usually they're picking 25, 28, somewhere in that range, right? And because of that, in a similar way, they're in no man's land. So what they're saying is we're going to take a premium player and we're going to take somebody who has top end potential. And we're going to hope in a 3-4 year, 5-year span, we can hit on a couple of these guys and really pay it off and start putting together some insanely talented teams based on a couple of these high-end hits at premium positions. You don't need hits everywhere. Every single NFL draft has you're all over the board with where your hits and misses are. And there's more misses than hits. And your hit might be in the 7th round. It might be in the 1st round. It is a crapshoot. But Green Bay is hedging their bets with their first pick and saying, we're going to go with the best possible player with a ton of upside. And I don't think they're necessarily going Joe Alexander, Yijian Leon here. They're not like throwing all of their marbles on the, highest skill set, but there's no doubt about it. They are definitely focused on taking premium level talent in their first pick at a premium level position. And we've seen that, right? Again, we've saw all the different, premium positions that they've taken, but go back to a Nick Perry. That was a massively athletic edge rusher who, comparatively to Clay Matthews out of USC, was even much more spectacularly athletic than what a Clay Matthews was. He was big, strong, physical, fast. He had every trait that you wanted. And they chose him and hoped that he hit his upside. He didn't. Had a couple nice seasons, but he didn't. Dachon Jones was a very similar prospect. Demarius Randall at corner. And then all of a sudden you start getting some of those hits rolling in. Kenny Clark, Jair Alexander, 2 big-time hits. Top-end players, young players who screamed potential, but needed to realize it. They get 2 big-time players on that defense at, again, you can argue defensive tackle, but I don't think anyone's going to argue that Kenny Clark is a premium level player at a very important position. Kevin King was another one of those chances. High-end traits. If he hits, you've got a top 5 corner in the league. That's the type of athletic ability and overall just athleticism and talent that he possessed at that position. Green Bay took a flyer on him. It hasn't worked out. He's been an okay professional from time to time. He's going to get another chance in Green Bay this season, but they took a chance on a high-end player at a premium position. Rashawn Gary, insanely similar, right? Didn't have the production at Michigan, had some of the injury concerns. They had him as their top edge rusher in that entire class. They loved Rashawn Gary, fit perfectly in that Mike Patton defense. The size, the speed, the strength, the ability to get around the edge. He had all of it. It's just about putting it together. And we've seen flashes of that, but it hasn't completely come together yet. And then Jordan Love, same thing. There's no more important position than quarterback. They took somebody who's actually also very athletic for the position, but has, high-end potential, making every throw on the field. You just have to focus it, coach it, and hope like hell that he hits his ceiling. And I very much expect Green Bay to continue with this philosophy, trying to get premium players in that first round. Listen, you could take, the quote-unquote best player available and they hit and, maybe you get a good player, but you really need, and here's how I ultimately view it. There's 2 ways to win a Super Bowl today in the NFL. You either need 6 or 7 just premium players at key positions, or you need to fill out the entirety of your roster with really good players and almost no weaknesses. You may not have that premium talent, but you don't have any weaknesses. Those to me are the 2 ways. And you don't have to look further back than really the last 2 seasons, I guess, Tampa Bay and Kansas City. Those are perfect examples of both. Kansas City has a bunch of holes on their overall roster, but they've got Patrick Mahomes, they've got Travis Kelce, they've got Tyreek Hill, they've got Mitchell Schwartz, Chris Jones, Honey Badger, Frank Clark. That is 7 premium players at big time positions that they can go out and they can, perform at an insanely high level, because those 7 players in and of themselves make you championship worthy. They have holes all over the roster at different spots, but those 7 players have made them championship caliber over the last couple seasons. The flip side of that is Tampa Bay. Now, how many All-Pros do you think Tampa Bay had last season? They had 2, both second-team All-Pros, both linebackers, not premium positions, Levante David and Devin White. Those were their All-Pros, but you've got Tom Brady at quarterback. You've got, Leonard Fournette, Ronald Jones at running back. You had Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Antonio Brown, Shelby Miller at wide receiver, Gronk and Cameron Braid at tight end. They get Tristan Wirfs at right tackle, Ryan Jensen at center, Ellie Marpet at left guard. Individually, they're defensive linemen. We've seen Ndamukong Suh play for terrible teams. Jason Pierre-Paul, same exact thing. I don't think Vita Vea is the guy that's turning any franchise around. Same thing with Shaq Barrett. But collectively, as a group, the four of them were phenomenal. Again, Levante David has had multiple years of terrible play, or playing with a terrible team in Tampa Bay. You pair him, with Devin White. They become one of the top linebacking groups in football, and it really solidifies that defense. Their corners played out of their mind. Sean Murphy-Bunting, Jamel Dean, Carlton Davis, safeties, Antoine Winfield and Whitehead. Like all of them, all those players I just named, their entire roster was good. And then, of course, you sprinkle in a Tom Brady and Levante David and Devin White. And, you've got a few high-end players there for sure. But this was just a roster that didn't have any holes, period. It was really tough to attack them, both offensively and defensively, because they were consistent everywhere. And to me, those are the two ways to build a team. And if you're consistently picking in the 20s, it's really tough to just consistently get good players that you can fill and just fill out a roster. And Green Bay, if you look at it, is much closer to that Kansas City model. Green Bay has some holes on their roster, but they've also got Aaron Rodgers, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, David Bakhtiari. They had Corey Linsley over the course of the last couple of seasons, high-end player. Kenny Clark, right? Zadarius Smith, Jair Alexander. 7 or 8 guys at premium positions that are giving you an opportunity to go out and win a Super Bowl. And yes, you have some holes in different spots, but those guys are giving you a puncher's chance. And again, as long as you keep those premium players together, you're going to have a chance. And Green Bay is trying to get more of those premium position players in the first round each year. So I like this philosophy from Green Bay, and I would expect it to continue. Look for positions that are very, very important with high-end athletes or high-end upside players that if they hit, you are going to get a massive payoff from it. And if you can hit on 2 of them every 5 years, maybe you get a good player and a couple busts in there, that's a very good hit rate. And it may not seem like it at times, but you look at the course of that last 16 years, and you've got a Kenny Clark in there, you've got a Jair Alexander, you've got an Aaron Rodgers, you've got a Brian Bulaga, Jordy Nelson. Like, they've taken some swings at some players with their first pick, and they've hit on a lot of those. And the ones that they've hit on have been insanely important to the success of this franchise, no more so than Aaron Rodgers. So expect that to continue. That's going to do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this look at the Packers' philosophy in the first round and why I expect it to continue. I'll be right back here tomorrow with a brand new topic. Please subscribe if you have not already. Make sure to check out Jake and Ross on today's audio version. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.